A school. It's a place we associate with safety, with learning, with the bright promise of the future. It's a sanctuary where young minds are nurtured and guided by dedicated educators. The teachers we admire become our mentors, our heroes. But what happens when that sanctuary is violated? What happens when the person entrusted with ultimate authority, the one meant to be the unwavering guardian of that safety, becomes the monster lurking in the halls? Today, we are going to peel back the pristine facade of one of the most respected educational institutions in the country to uncover a story so horrific, it defies belief. It's a story of obsession, rejection, and a crime so gruesome it will forever stain the hallowed grounds of knowledge. Before we walk through these haunted hallways and expose the terrible truth of what happened to a beloved teacher, please, do me a favor. If you find value in stories that seek the truth, no matter how dark, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You are not going to want to miss a single chilling detail. Our story begins at the prestigious Blackwood Academy, a place where secrets were kept as well as lessons were taught. But one secret, born of a twisted love, was about to be ground into the very foundation of the school. Blackwood Academy was an institution built on the twin pillars of tradition and excellence. Its sprawling campus, a meticulously curated landscape of manicured lawns, ancient oak trees, and Gothic revival architecture, was a world unto itself. Ivy crawled up the stone walls of the main hall, its green tendrils reaching for the stained glass windows that depicted scenes of scholarly pursuit and enlightenment. For generations, the children of the elite had walked these hallowed halls, their futures as carefully mapped out as the school's own pristine grounds. Blackwood wasn't just a school. It was a legacy, a promise of a life of privilege and success, and at its helm was Principal Alastair Finch. To the outside world, Alastair Finch was the very embodiment of Blackwood's ideals. A man in his late 50s, he possessed an air of quiet authority and intellectual gravitas. His suits were always impeccably tailored. His silver hair was always perfectly coiffed, and his public addresses were models of erudition and gentle paternalism. He had been with the academy for over 2 decades, first as a history teacher, then as a department head, and for the past 10 years as its principal. He was seen as the stoic guardian of Blackwood's reputation, a man who valued discipline, order, and the relentless pursuit of perfection above all else. His office, a grand, wood-paneled room filled with leather-bound books and the faint scent of lemon polish, was a sanctuary of calm and control in the bustling heart of the school. But beneath the polished veneer of the respected educator, a different man festered. Alastair Finch was a creature of profound loneliness and simmering resentment. His life outside the imposing gates of Blackwood was an empty one. His wife had left him years ago, and his own children, now grown, kept a polite but firm distance. The academy was his entire world, its students and staff the subjects of his carefully controlled kingdom. He derived a sense of power from the order he imposed, a vicarious thrill from the successes of the students who passed through his halls. Yet, this control was a fragile thing, and in the quiet moments of his solitary life, a deep, gnawing emptiness consumed him. Into this meticulously ordered, emotionally barren world walked Anya Sharma. Anya was everything Alastair was not. She was vibrant, passionate, and possessed an effortless charm that drew people to her like moths to a flame. At 28, she was the new English literature teacher, a breath of fresh air in the sometimes stuffy atmosphere of Blackwood. Her classroom was not a place of rigid discipline, but one of lively debate and intellectual curiosity. She had a rare gift for making centuries-old poetry feel relevant and exciting, for connecting with her students on a level that went beyond the curriculum. She was, in a word, beautiful not just in the classical sense, with her warm, expressive eyes, cascade of dark hair, and radiant smile, but in the way she moved, the way she spoke, the very energy she exuded. The students adored her, the faculty respected her, and Alastair Finch became utterly, pathologically obsessed with her. It began subtly. He would find excuses to visit her classroom, lingering in the doorway under the guise of observing her teaching methods. He would commend her on her innovative lesson plans, his praise always lasting just a little too long, his gaze always a little too intense. He started summoning her to his office for trivial matters, meetings that could have been handled with a simple email, just to have her presence fill the sterile emptiness of the room. He would compliment her dress, her hair, the scent of her perfume, his comments always hovering on the knife's edge of professional impropriety. Anya, at first, was oblivious. She interpreted his attention as the well-meaning, if slightly awkward, mentorship of a senior administrator. She was new, eager to please, and grateful for what she perceived as his support. She would smile politely, thank him for his guidance, and then return to the vibrant world of her classroom, leaving him alone in the quiet, oppressive grandeur of his office. But as the months wore on, Alistair's attentions became more pointed, more unsettling. He began sending her gifts. A rare, first-edition copy of a poetry anthology, a bouquet of expensive lilies delivered to her classroom, a single, perfect rose left on her desk in the morning. He started to engineer accidental encounters in the hallways, his hand brushing against hers, his body blocking her path for a moment longer than was necessary. His emails, once professional and concise, became long, rambling missives about art, philosophy, and the shared loneliness of the intellectual soul. He was casting a net, a web of unwanted intimacy, and Anya began to feel its sticky, suffocating threads. She tried to create distance. She would respond to his emails with brief, professional replies. She would keep the door to her classroom open during his visits. She made a point of mentioning her boyfriend, Mark, a kind and easygoing architect she was deeply in love with, in their conversations. But Alistair was undeterred. In his mind, Mark was a temporary obstacle, an unworthy placeholder for the profound connection he believed he and Anya were destined to share. He saw her gentle rebuffs not as rejections, but as a form of coy encouragement, a part of a romantic game that only he was playing. The obsession reached its tipping point on the night of the annual Founders' Day Gala. It was the social event of the Blackwood calendar, a lavish affair held in the grand dining hall. Alistair, in his role as principal, was the master of ceremonies. He watched Anya all night, his eyes following her as she mingled with parents and faculty, a vision of elegance in a simple, dark blue dress. He saw the easy way she laughed with her colleagues, the affectionate way she touched Mark's arm, and in the dark, twisted recesses of his mind, a venomous jealousy began to bloom. Late in the evening, as the event was winding down, he cornered her near the French doors that led out onto the terrace. Mark had gone to get their coats. Anya was alone. "You look stunning tonight, Ms. Sharma," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur. "Thank you, Principal Finch," Anya replied, her smile tight, her eyes searching for Mark in the dwindling crowd. "It's been a lovely evening." "Anya," he said, taking a step closer, his use of her first name a deliberate breach of professional etiquette. "I feel we have a connection, you and I, a meeting of minds, something profound." "Mr. Finch, she began, trying to find the words to gently but firmly shut him down. "Don't," he interrupted, his hand reaching out to touch her arm. "You don't have to pretend. I see the way you look at me. I know you feel it too." His touch was like an electric shock, cold and unpleasant. Anya pulled her arm away, her polite facade finally cracking. "Principal Finch, you are mistaken," she said, her voice firm, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and alarm. "My relationship with you is strictly professional. I have a partner, whom I love very much. Please, do not speak to me like this again." She turned to leave, but he grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't walk away from me," he hissed, his face contorted into a mask of wounded pride and nascent rage. "You don't know what you're throwing away." At that moment, Mark returned, his brow furrowing at the sight of the principal's hand on Anya's arm. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his tone laced with protective concern. Alistair released her as if her skin had suddenly become red-hot. He straightened his tie, his face reverting to its usual impassive mask, but his eyes, dark and cold, were filled with a chilling fury. "Everything is perfectly fine," he said, his voice dripping with a false saccharine charm. "I was just congratulating Ms. Sharma on her excellent work this semester. Enjoy the rest of your evening." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving a trail of icy dread in his wake. The incident deeply unsettled Anya. She confided in Mark, who was furious and urged her to file a formal complaint. But Anya was hesitant. Alistair Finch was a powerful and respected man. She was a new teacher still on probation. A complaint, she feared, would be her word against his, a battle she was unlikely to win. Could ruin her career, not just at Blackwood, but at any other school. She decided, against her better judgment, to try and handle it herself, to be firm and clear in her boundaries, hoping that her direct rejection would be enough to make him stop. It was a fatal miscalculation. For Alistair, her rejection was not a boundary. It was a declaration of war. It was an unforgivable insult to his pride, a confirmation of his deepest insecurities. The object of his obsession had not just spurned him. She had humiliated him. And in the cold, dark logic of his twisted mind, a new, horrific thought began to take root. If he couldn't have her, no one could. The following week was thick with an unspoken tension. Alistair avoided Anya, his presence in the hallways a cold, passing shadow. But Anya could feel his eyes on her, a constant, malevolent surveillance that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The hallowed halls of Blackwood no longer felt like a place of learning and opportunity. They felt like a cage, and he was the zookeeper. It happened on a Thursday. It was a gray, drizzly afternoon, the kind of day that seemed to sap the life out of the world. Anya had stayed late, preparing for a parent-teacher conference. She had called Mark around 5:30 p.m., telling him she was just packing up and would be home in an hour. She never made it. When she hadn't arrived by 8 p.m., Mark started to worry. He called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He drove to the school, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. He found her car, a modest blue sedan, still in its designated spot in the faculty parking lot. The school was dark, the gates locked. He called the police. The initial search was perfunctory. A young woman, late coming home from work. There could be 100 rational explanations. But as the hours turned into a day, and then two, the rational explanations began to fall away, replaced by a growing, terrifying dread. The hallowed halls had swallowed her whole, leaving behind only a chilling, impenetrable silence. The deceit that had been festering in the heart of the principal was about to give way to a truth far more gruesome than anyone could possibly imagine. Detective Isabel Rossi was a woman who dealt in the ugly realities that lay beneath the polished surfaces of her city. She had a sharp, analytical mind and a weary, cynical gaze that had been earned through years of sifting through the wreckage of broken lives. When the missing person case of Anya Sharma landed on her desk, it initially registered as another sad but depressingly common story. But as she delved into the preliminary reports, a series of small, discordant notes began to form a dissonant and unsettling melody. The first thing that struck her was the location. Blackwood Academy was a fortress, a self-contained world with high walls, locked gates, and a state-of-the-art security system. The idea that someone could simply vanish from within its confines seemed improbable. The second was the victim herself. By all accounts, Anya Sharma was a stable, happy, and responsible young woman. She was in a loving, long-term relationship, she was passionate about her career, and she had no known enemies, no history of mental health issues, no reason to simply walk away from her life. This wasn't a runaway case. This was something else. Rossi's investigation began where Anya's life had seemingly ended. Blackwood Academy. She walked the immaculate grounds, her sensible shoes a stark contrast to the old-world opulence of the place. She felt a palpable sense of unease in the air, a heavy, cloying silence that seemed to cling to the old stone walls. It was a place that was used to keeping secrets. Her first official interview was with the principal, Alistair Finch. He received her in his grand, wood-paneled office, the very picture of concerned authority. He spoke of Anya in glowing terms, his voice laced with a carefully rehearsed sadness. He called her a shining star, a gifted educator, tragic loss to the Blackwood community. He recounted his version of their last interaction, a brief, professional conversation about an upcoming curriculum review, his face a mask of solemn grief. Rossi, a keen observer of human behavior, noted the subtle tells that belied his performance. His grief seemed theatrical, his words too polished, too perfect. There was a lack of genuine emotion in his eyes, a cold, watchful intelligence that was assessing her, gauging her reactions. She also noticed that for a man who claimed to be devastated by the disappearance of a colleague, he seemed remarkably composed, his control absolute. "Were you here, at the school, on the evening Miss Sharma disappeared?" Rossi asked, her tone deceptively casual. "I was," Finch replied without hesitation. "I often work late. There is always a great deal of administrative work to attend to. I believe I left around 8 p.m. Did you see Ms. Sharma before you left?" "No, I did not. Her classroom is in a separate wing. I was in my office the entire time." "Did you notice anything unusual that evening? Anyone who shouldn't have been on the premises?" Finch steepled his fingers, a gesture that Rossi recognized as a classic stalling tactic. "No, detective. The evening was entirely unremarkable. That is what makes this all so baffling." Rossi left the meeting with a nagging suspicion that she couldn't quite put her finger on. Finch's story was plausible, his alibi, though self-reported, was solid. But there was something off about him, a hollowness at his core that set her instincts on high alert. The investigation expanded. Rossi and her team interviewed every member of the faculty, every janitor, every security guard who had been on duty that week. They pieced together a timeline of Anya's last known day. She had taught her classes, attended a department meeting, and then returned to her classroom to work. The last person to see her alive, other than her killer, was a fellow teacher who had poked her head in to say goodbye around 5 p.m. The interviews with the staff painted a complex picture of Alistair Finch. To many, he was a respected, if somewhat distant, leader. But a few, particularly the younger female teachers, spoke of a pattern of behavior that was unsettling. They described his unwanted attention, his inappropriate compliments, his tendency to favor the more attractive members of his staff. A picture began to emerge of a man who used his power and position to create an environment of subtle, psychological intimidation. Anya's boyfriend, Mark, provided the most damning piece of the puzzle. His grief was raw, visceral, a stark contrast to Finch's sterile performance. He told Rossi about the incident at the Founders' Day Gala, about Finch's unwanted advances, about Anya's fear and her decision not to file a formal complaint. "She was scared," Mark said, his voice thick with a mixture of sorrow and self-recrimination. "She thought it would ruin her career. I should have pushed her. I should have done something." Mark's testimony was a game-changer. It provided a motive, a powerful, explosive cocktail of obsession and rejection that transformed Alistair Finch from a person of interest into the prime suspect. Rossi's focus now narrowed with laser-like precision on the principal. She knew that Finch was a man who valued control and order above all else. If he had committed this crime, he would have been meticulous, careful to cover his tracks. But he was also a man of routine, a creature of habit. And it was in the disruption of that routine that she hoped to find the cracks in his story. She subpoenaed his phone records, his computer files, his financial statements. She put a surveillance team on him, documenting his every move. And she went back to the school, this time with a forensic team in tow. The first search of Anya's classroom had yielded nothing. But Rossi had a hunch. If Finch had lured Anya out of her room, where would he have taken her? His office was the most logical place. It was his domain, a place where he was in complete control. The forensic team descended upon the principal's office, a swarm of white-suited technicians in the hallowed halls of Blackwood. They sprayed the room with luminol, a chemical that reveals the presence of blood, even in trace amounts that have been cleaned up. As the lights were dimmed and the black lights were turned on, a faint, ghostly luminescence appeared on a small section of the expensive Persian rug that lay in front of Finch's desk. It was a small patch, no bigger than a dinner plate, but it was there. Someone had bled in this room. The sample was rushed to the lab for DNA analysis. While they waited for the results, Rossi continued to dig. She re-examined the school's security footage. The cameras covered the entrances, the exits, the main hallways, but there were blind spots, older wings of the school that had yet to be upgraded. Anya's classroom and Finch's office were in one of these blind spots. However, the footage from the main gate on the night of the disappearance was revealing. It showed Finch's car leaving the premises at 8:07 p.m., consistent with his statement. But what was interesting was what it didn't show. It didn't show Anya's car ever leaving. And it didn't show any other vehicles entering or leaving the campus between the time Anya was last seen and the time Finch departed. This meant one of two things. Either Anya had left on foot, a highly unlikely scenario given the school's remote location and the drizzly weather, or she had never left the campus at all. The DNA results came back. The blood on the rug was a match for Anya Sharma. Rossi now had the physical evidence she needed to prove that a violent struggle had taken place in Finch's office. But a small bloodstain was not a body. And without a body, a murder conviction would be difficult, if not impossible. The question that consumed her, that kept her awake at night, was a simple, yet horrifying one. What had Alastair Finch done with Anya Sharma's body? The surveillance team reported that Finch's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. His meticulously ordered routine was starting to unravel. He was seen making late-night trips to the school, entering through a side door and staying for hours. He was also seen frequenting a local hardware store, purchasing a strange and seemingly random assortment of items. Heavy-duty plastic sheeting, duct tape, and several large containers of industrial-strength cleaning chemicals. Rossi's mind raced, trying to piece together the disparate elements of the puzzle. The late-night visits to the school, the cleaning supplies, the lack of a body. She thought about the school itself, its vast, labyrinthine structure, its countless rooms, its hidden corners. It was the perfect place to hide something or someone. But where? The answer came to her in the middle of the night, a sudden, chilling epiphany that made her sit bolt upright in bed. She remembered something from her initial tour of the school, a detail that had seemed insignificant at the time. Finch, in his role as the proud custodian of Blackwood's history, had taken her on a brief tour of the campus. He had pointed out the new science wing, the state-of-the-art gymnasium, and then, almost as an afterthought, he had gestured towards an older, less glamorous part of the building. And that, he had said, a hint of disdain in his voice, is the old vocational wing, a relic from a bygone era. We rarely use it now apart from the occasional art project. It's mostly used for storage. The vocational wing, a place with workshops, with heavy machinery, with tools that could be used for construction or for deconstruction. Rossi felt a cold dread wash over her. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic and went straight to the bone, that the answer to the mystery of Anya Sharma's disappearance lay hidden in the dust and the silence of that forgotten wing. She now had a motive, she had physical evidence of an assault, and she had a theory, a horrific, almost unthinkable theory, about what had happened next. All she needed now was a warrant, and the courage to face the truth, however gruesome it might be. The echoes in the silence of Blackwood Academy were about to become a deafening scream. The search warrant was granted at dawn. Detective Rossi didn't wait for the sun to fully rise. She assembled her team, a somber and determined group of officers and forensic specialists, and they drove to Blackwood Academy in the gray pre-dawn light. The school was still and silent, a sleeping giant that held a monstrous secret in its belly. They had arranged for a junior administrator to meet them, a nervous, oldish man who fumbled with the keys to the main gate, his hands trembling as he let them in. Alastair Finch had been placed under 24-hour surveillance at his home. Rossi wanted him away from the school, away from the scene of his crime. She wanted to be able to peel back the layers of his deception without his cold, watchful eyes upon her. They bypassed the pristine, manicured parts of the campus and went straight to the old vocational wing. It was just as Finch had described it, a relic from a different time. The air in the corridor was stale, thick with the smell of dust, old wood, and turpentine. The linoleum floors were cracked and faded, the paint on the walls was peeling, and the fluorescent lights flickered with a tired, buzzing hum. It was a place that time and the rest of the school had forgotten. The wing was comprised of a series of large, cavernous rooms. A defunct auto shop, a dusty metalworking studio, and at the very end of the hall, a woodworking classroom. It was this room that drew Rossi in, a strange, primal instinct guiding her steps. The door was locked. The administrator didn't have a key. "It hasn't been used for years," he stammered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. One of Rossi's officers produced a battering ram, and with a single, resounding crack, the old wooden door splintered and burst open. The room was vast and filled with the ghosts of past projects. Old, half-finished cabinets and birdhouses sat on dusty workbenches. The walls were lined with tools, their outlines still visible on the pegboards where they had once hung. But in the center of the room, under a single bare light bulb, sat a large industrial-grade woodchipper. It was an old, heavy-duty machine, the kind used for grinding large branches and small trees into mulch. And it was immaculately, unnaturally clean. While the rest of the room was covered in a thick layer of dust, the woodchipper gleamed as if it had been recently polished. The metal chute was free of any debris, and the surrounding floor had been swept clean. It was a glaring anomaly, a single point of pristine order in a room that was otherwise a shrine to decay and neglect. "Get the forensic team in here," Rossi said, her voice barely a whisper. "I want them to take this thing apart, piece by piece." As the forensic team set to work, meticulously disassembling the machine, Rossi and another officer conducted a search of the rest of the room. In a small, locked supply closet, they found what they were looking for. Piled in a corner were the items Finch had been seen purchasing from the hardware store: rolls of heavy-duty plastic sheeting, several nearly empty containers of industrial-strength bleach, and a collection of brushes and rags, all stained with a faint, pinkish hue. And behind the supplies, tucked away in the darkest corner of the closet, they found a small, dark blue clutch purse. Rossi opened it with a gloved hand. Inside was a driver's license, a credit card, and a lipstick. The name on the license was Anya Sharma. A short time later, one of the forensic technicians called out, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and revulsion. He had been examining the blades of the woodchipper using a high-powered magnifying glass. Wedged deep within the complex machinery, caught between two of the powerful grinding teeth, was a small, almost microscopic fragment of something. It was a tiny sliver of bone, and attached to it was a single strand of long, dark hair. The grinding truth, in all its unspeakable horror, was finally revealed. Alistair Finch had not just killed Anya Sharma. He had erased her. He had lured her to his office under a false pretense, and when she had once again rejected his advances, his wounded pride and obsessive rage had exploded into a homicidal fury. He had killed her there, on the floor of his immaculate office. And then, under the cover of darkness, he had transported her body to the forgotten vocational wing, a place he knew would be deserted, a place where no one would think to look. He had spent hours, perhaps even days, methodically dismembering her body and feeding it, piece by piece, into the industrial woodchipper, grinding her beautiful, vibrant form into a gruesome, unrecognizable pulp. The cleaning supplies, the late-night visits, it was all a part of his meticulous, monstrous plan to dispose of the evidence, to wipe away every last physical trace of the woman who had dared to reject him. The arrest was made quietly, at Finch's stately suburban home. When Rossi and her team arrived, he was in his study, reading a book of poetry, the very picture of scholarly tranquility. He showed no surprise, no emotion, as they placed him in handcuffs. His carefully constructed world had finally crumbled, and all that was left was the cold, empty shell of a man. His confession, delivered in the sterile, windowless environment of a police interrogation room, was a chilling monologue of delusion and narcissism. He spoke of Anya not as a victim but as a tormentor. He claimed that she had led him on, that her kindness was a form of cruel flirtation, that her rejection was a deliberate act of emotional violence. In his twisted reality, he was the victim, and her murder was a tragic but necessary act of self-preservation. He showed no remorse, no guilt, only a cold, intellectual detachment, as if he were discussing a particularly complex historical event. He even seemed to take a perverse pride in the cleverness of his disposal method, a final, horrific act of control over the woman he could not possess. The trial was a media sensation, a grim spectacle that captivated and horrified the nation. The story of the respected principal who had ground his beautiful teacher's body to dispose of it was the stuff of nightmares. A story that exposed the terrifying truth that evil can often wear the most respectable of masks. Alistair Finch was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, condemned to spend the rest of his days in a world of rigid, unforgiving order, a pale imitation of the kingdom he had once ruled. Blackwood Academy was irrevocably scarred. The revelation of the horror that had occurred within its hallowed halls shattered its reputation, leaving a permanent stain on its legacy. The school closed for the remainder of the year, its corridors silent, its classrooms empty. When it eventually reopened, it was a different place, its innocence lost, its name forever linked with an act of unimaginable brutality. The vocational wing was torn down, a desperate attempt to excise the cancer that had grown in its heart, but the memory of what had happened there would forever haunt the campus. For Detective Isabel Rossi, the case was a grim victory. She had found the truth, she had brought a monster to justice, and she had given Anya Sharma's grieving family a semblance of closure, a cold comfort in the face of an immeasurable loss. But the case left its mark on her as all the bad ones did. She would forever be haunted by the image of that gleaming, unnaturally clean woodchipper, a symbol of a depravity so profound it defied comprehension. The aftertaste of justice was bitter. A killer was behind bars, but a bright, beautiful life had been extinguished, snuffed out by a pathetic, lonely man's wounded pride. The hallowed halls of Blackwood were no longer a symbol of excellence and tradition. They were a monument to a horrific secret, a chilling reminder that behind the most polished facades, a grinding, terrible truth can lie in wait.